What's up, guys? Welcome to episode number 2 of the Thinking It Through podcast with Nate. I am Nate, your host. Just a couple housekeeping things. The first episode has been officially posted today, actually. I just posted it before I started recording this, so I'm really excited about that. All of my links are out there down in the description. I'll mention this later as well, but you'll see my Patreon link as well as my link to the audio-only version of this podcast if you prefer to just listen. And then on there, you can also access the RSS feed link where you can add it to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, or whatever your podcast provider is. So now that that's out of the way, just want to talk a little bit about the topic that we're going to be going over today, and then we'll dive in. So today the topic is going to be LARPing and learning as false activism. So if anybody's unfamiliar with the term LARPing, it stands for live action roleplay. When I was first introduced to this topic in tangent to activism, it made me kind of laugh because it's a perfect description of what happens so often in the activism space. You'll see people acting like they're activists but never actually accomplishing anything or trying to accomplish anything. But then I also wanted to dive in a little bit about another negative feedback loop that occurs within the activism space, which is learning. Now, in most cases, learning is a great thing. Of course, and if you're going to be an activist, you should absolutely know a lot about the topic that you're going to be an activist about. You're going to get, asked hard questions, especially when you start talking to family and friends, and then even further than that, if you ever hold events like tabling or you organize a protest, you're going to need to know about the topic that you're discussing so that you don't come across ignorant or you don't come across just overzealous about a topic without having actually learned about it. But that being said, it's really easy to get too caught up into learning. So that's kind of an overview of the topic that I want to talk about today. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into it. So what is LARPing and activism? Simply put, it's, again, live action role playing. It's pretending that you're an activist. You're acting like you're an activist, you're going through the motions, but you're never actually accomplishing anything. I think there's like an extra little factor that comes into play with activism that goes further than setting up your organization and setting up, the actions. You of course have to really care about what you're doing, but you have to go that extra step to really bring change. Most people and systems, organizations, societies are often stuck in their ways. They're not interested in change because they're at a baseline level. This doesn't mean that there aren't people or organizations or societies that aren't interested in change, but that's the default. An object at rest stays at rest, and so that definitely applies to society at large and the things that we're trying to change. So I think that everybody in society knows that there's things that need to change right now. What needs to change and what the problem is highly debated, but people definitely know that there needs to be a change. Unfortunately, people either don't go far enough to understand what the problem is and what needs to be changed, or if they do go that far, they don't understand how to change it. And if they do go that far, they don't actually engage in how to change it. And that, I think, is that jump right there between the learning and the acting. So that's going to be the last thing that I talk about, is that jump from learning to acting, but I'm going to start first on the LARPing. So what are some examples of at least what I consider LARPing in society right now for activism? One kind of upsetting trend to me that I've been seeing lately is young people doing hunger strikes. I really don't get this. I really do not understand why people think this is going to change anything. If we have already had, millions of starving children across the country, if we have already had problems with climate change causing, asthma for millions of kids and even into adulthood, I'm one of the victims there. If we've already had all of these problems plaguing society, such as no access to health care and people falling below the poverty line and all of that stuff, and that is not, and these are large scale things that are happening across society. And if that is not changing, action on the biggest scale, if that is not encouraging our leaders, our Congress people, the president, anybody at the highest level, the most wealthiest among us, to actually do something to change and to fix those issues, why would a small group of activists going on a hunger strike change anything? The answer is it won't. The most frustrating thing about this to me is that this is an action that will get attention, but it will only get attention among the people who already know that the change needs to happen. Um, it's going to spread like wildfire across the people who are already, fired up about the issue. But it's never going to go further than that. It might feel inspiring to people who see, young kids saying, I'm not going to eat for this long, whether or not, it's in solidarity with, people in other countries who are having to go through this because of what a country like America is doing, or what the future is going to be like when we have issues with, lack of crops and things like that. Regardless of what you're doing it for and what your reason is, it's not going to spread further than the activism community, and especially not further than, the people who already know the issue. Um, and spreading awareness of an issue, first off, is also a minor part in changing things. I honestly think that spreading awareness of an issue is the easiest part of activism. I think the most difficult part of activism is changing people's minds and then getting those people to get fired up enough to do something real, to do something tangible, and to affect people that are in positions of power to actually make change. So that's one of the things that I've been seeing lately that's frustrating to me. I remember like way back in the day, right after I was getting out of high school, or maybe my senior year of high school, I posted a video about the no makeup challenge. I can't even remember what that was about exactly, like why people were doing that. But I had a similar thought to this. It was like, what is you not wearing makeup going to change about this issue? Like, it's not going to change anything. It's false activism. And so this really bugs me. I mean, as I said in my last podcast, I'm a nonprofit executive director. Um, I run a nonprofit called Utah Approves, and so I don't know. I've been one of those people who's been fired up enough to try to actually do something, to try to spend every day of my life actually engaging in activities that I think will bring real change, and trying to engage with the leaders on whatever level that we need to make a difference, to make a change, to change their minds, and to get them fired enough to take an action, given that they are in a position to do so. So it's stuff like this that I just don't get it. I don't understand why people think this is actually going to change something. I mean, it's admirable that you have the willpower to go 2 weeks without eating food. I could not go a day. I've never been able to go a day in my life without eating willfully. Like I've gone like long periods of time where I haven't eaten. Um, I don't think I've ever gone a full day, but depression has gotten me to a space like that, or being out somewhere where I don't, have easy access to food, or even like being, so socially anxious in the past that I haven't been willing to speak up about my need to eat, and suppressing those feelings, whatever. But, again, that's admirable that you can do that. That willpower in and of itself is admirable. And the fact that you care enough about something to, not eat for 2 weeks because you want to bring attention to it is admirable. But I would encourage you to take that passion and direct it somewhere that's actually going to get to the hearts and minds of the people in power. And I think there's a lot to be said about, the people in power. I don't think that there's literally anything that anybody can do right now to make change on the national scale in the US. I do not think that there is a single activism, action that we can do, an event that we can organize, an amount of people that'll be a significant threshold to really fire up and make real meaningful change on the national level. I don't think that Joe Biden is going to be receptive to that. I don't think members of Congress, members of the Senate, these people just aren't going to be receptive to real change happening. But my whole philosophy of activism isn't about starting at the top. And I think this is honestly where a lot of people go wrong, is they think, well, all these little actions aren't going to help. We got to do something drastic, right? We got to do something drastic that's going to get to the hearts and minds of the people at the top. And I really just don't think that's going to happen right now. It's very unfortunate. It's bullshit. I don't, it should be like that. The people on the top should care about what the people are thinking. There should be a threshold of people who care about an issue that should fire them up, or at least push them to do something meaningful and real. But there's not, and that's just the reason for that is the incentives at the highest level are just perverse. They're more beholden to the people that are funding their campaign than they are to us. And that will be the case until we change campaign finance. And even changing campaign finance has to come from the people at the top, unfortunately. And again, they're getting paid from people who don't want to change campaign finance. So, why do I still have hope, though, I guess is the real question. So, my philosophy of activism is to start at the bottom. And I think this is historically true throughout America, that we have started at the bottom and you work your way up to put enough pressure on the top that they can't ignore you anymore. So in that light, I guess there is a certain threshold, but that threshold isn't a number of people caring. It isn't a big protest. It isn't a certain amount of actions and events that you've held. It's legislation that has been passed in at least 2/3 of states across the country. It seems to be that that's around the area that the people at the top really start feeling the pressure and thinking, if we don't do something, we're going to lose our election regardless of how much money we're given. That's something that they actually do worry about. They want to be in positions of power. It makes them feel important because they are, except they're not, because they're not doing anything important. So, and it sucks that they don't get that, but it doesn't really matter because they're on the national scale, and that in and of itself gives them importance, and it honestly is important. So, they have the power whether or not they choose to wield it. That's the point. So, um, a great example that I always like to use is marijuana legalization. We haven't achieved that on the national scale yet, but it's coming. It will happen, I think, within the next couple of presidents. That, of course, could change, given if Trump gets elected in 2024 and then the Democrats have the stupid reaction that they always have of, let's elect the most electable person, even though they're not the most electable, right? If they choose another Hillary or Biden-like figure, right? Or, someone like Pete Buttigieg or something like that. I don't know if those people would ever, legalize marijuana. But even some of these new wave politicians like Beto O'Rourke, maybe even Pete Buttigieg, maybe Kamala Harris, I don't know, I don't have much hope for her though, would legalize marijuana. But anyway, that's beside the point. I do think it's coming on the national scale, whether it goes through the president or it comes through Congress. It's coming because it's been passed in so many states. So many states have passed medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, that something is going to have to change on the federal scale soon. And so I think that's a perfect example, and that's a strategy that we honestly need to take with everything that we want to change. Now, is this bad news for some people? Does this suck to hear? Yeah, of course. I mean, we all want to see climate legislation enacted tomorrow, yesterday, right? We all want to see changes for, you know, all drug decriminalization, or, um, you know, a universal basic income, or whatever issue it is that you care about. We want to see this happen on the national scale right away because it needs to, and it should have happened a long time ago. But that's just not how it works. And unfortunately, we're lagging decades behind because I think a lot of people have got caught up in this mindset that has to happen on the federal level first, and that's just not going to happen. That's something that we have to accept. This makes our jobs as activists a lot harder. It really, really does. But that doesn't mean that there's not hope. And so we have to start in our states, we have to start in our communities and start organizing there and start putting pressure on our local leaders first. And then once there's enough pressure there, then we can turn to the national scale. So that's one of the things that we really need to focus on if we want to be true activists and not LARPers, is we need to focus on the local scale first. And I think that will fix a lot of this weird mindset that we need to do something drastic, like a hunger strike, for instance. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is protests. And unfortunately, protests, they don't do anything. Like, take 2020 for example. Massive protests across the country. Every major city had a Black Lives Matter protest, being upset about George Floyd getting killed. And, this is a great issue to care about. We should be focused on why is it that people of color are being killed disproportionately. And, there's a huge discussion on why that is. And obviously, some of the reason is that there is racism on some scales, and there is a disproportionate understanding by people like police and law enforcement at large who don't really, haven't spent the time and the effort to understand, the communities they came from, themselves, the issues that are causing this. That, of course, is a huge deal, and this is very important. But did anything change from those protests? No. And a lot of people are going to blame that on, well, there was the riots and that gave them an excuse. But, I think to some degree, if you have a large mass scale protest like that, there's going to be some people who get violent, and that's idiotic. And obviously, anybody who writes off the entire protest as a riot because of those people is also being an idiot. But I don't. The problem is, though, that this idea, everyone on the national scale was aware that this happened and aware of at least some of the asks that we were saying was that, I hate the idea, I hate the phrase defund the police. I do think that it was a stupid way to go, and it got a lot of people instantly turned off to what the real message was. I mean, I know some people were saying we actually need to just defund the police, and I think those people were radical, though. I think that most people understood what, defund the police meant was that we need to take some money out of the police departments and put it into community programs. And that's the whole point. And people on the highest scales understood that. People across Congress understood that. But what did we see? We saw someone like Nancy Pelosi take a knee, right? We saw a massive Black Lives Matter banner or whatever it was, like, mural painted across the ground in Washington, D.C. And I even saw that here where I live in one of the big one of the city halls in the biggest city here. So, but nothing changed. It was all virtue signaling, and there's a huge reason why they can get away with that. But one of the main reasons that they can get away with that is because they're on the federal scale and they're not beholden to us. We have to start local first, and even unfortunately, protests are just seen right now by people in charge as a bunch of kids yelling and being upset about maybe something they shouldn't be, and they get condescending about it and stuff like that. So unfortunately, protests in a lot of times are another form of LARPing. They don't actually accomplish anything, especially not as much as they used to. I think having mass amounts of people out in the street used to worry people who were in charge, but it just doesn't anymore. It doesn't worry the people who are in charge anymore because they realize that at the end of the day, we're all going to go home. We're all going to, go to the stores that are funded by the people who fund their campaigns, or that are owned by the people that fund their campaigns. We're going to buy our food, we're going to go home, and we're going to go to work the next day. Most people want some kind of calm and peace in society, and I know that a lot of people are saying, well, that's exactly the point, and that we need to get that upset that they're going to change something, but if we get that upset, we might actually just crumple our government, and I don't think that's the way to go. So I think that peaceful activism, starting at the lowest scales, building our way up, is the key. Another thing that is LARPing that I think is petition gathering, and especially online petition gathering, or maybe exclusively online petition gathering. I remember this kind of started probably in 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, 10 as far as, when I was starting to become aware of stuff like this and getting sent petitions and signing them thinking that, wow, 100,000 people have signed this, 1,000,000 people have signed this, something is going to change. The president's going to care about this and actually realize that this many people care. But they don't. And it's for all of the reasons that I've been laying out. It's these exact reasons that are the problem. Online petition gathering is just like a protest. It's mass amounts of people doing something that they know that they don't have to listen to. Okay, so now past these basic, benign actions, another thing, or I guess one more benign action is, Twitter activism. Twitter storms, retweeting, wow, this tweet got 50,000 retweets, or we all tweeted this hashtag and that's got to change something. No, it's never going to change anything. No matter how many people get on Twitter and talk about something, it will never change anything. Like, I just want people to understand this. It will never change anything. So if you really care about the issues, get off of Twitter, get off the online petitions, and open your mind to the fact that you need to start organizing locally and doing meaningful action. And I'll talk about what that will look like in a minute. Now, some people do realize this, and they do start to organize. And I see this, unfortunately, across my state, where there's tons of activist groups who have organized, they've created Facebook groups, and they have meetings occasionally. But what happens is that they just get in those meetings, and they just talk. And they just talk about the issues, and it becomes more like a community than an activist group, where people have organized around something that they all care about, but then they collectively complain about it, and they never do anything. Okay, and then some people do organize and do things like hunger strikes or be the ones to start the Twitter hashtags, but again, that stuff doesn't change anything. So we need to get our mind, especially off the online space. Online space is not doing anything for us. We need to get out in person, we need to organize, we need to do real action, we need to talk to our legislators, we need to talk to our local city councils, we need to talk to our mayors, and we need to let them know that there is large pressure from within their communities to make this change. Whatever that change is going to look like, whether it be something minor that just signals to people on the higher up that a wave is coming from the bottom. Again, everything has to start from the bottom and build its way up. So, once our local leaders start to realize this, they will feel the pressure. They actually are beholden to us more than the people at the highest levels are, because we're the people that, there's a smaller population that's electing them. And especially when it comes to local campaigns, they especially, like, typically, they don't have large donors. And so they actually care about what you think about. I've had great success, like, just emailing my city councilors and actually getting replies. I've had an in-person meeting with one of my city councilors where they sat down and they asked me, like, why am I doing this? Why do I care about this? Can you tell me about this? Can you educate me about this? So this is where real change actually starts to happen, is at the bottom. So, I guess that is a good overview of the LARPing issue. Now, I want to pivot a little bit to the learning issue. So continually learning and talking about a topic, especially online, never helps. No matter how educated you get about a topic, unless you start to act, it doesn't matter. And I unfortunately see this where there's a ton of people who, get on local, chats or whatever, and they'll talk about the issue and they'll continually get educated about the issue, and they'll learn more and they'll learn all these terms and all this stuff, and we'll debate internally about what's the best way to go about things. But I unfortunately see, like, most of these people never engage in their actual local groups or start a group themselves to actually make a difference. And I do think that it's like a curve, right? It's like, when you start here at the bottom, on a scale, like, and you start at the beginning, like, you do need to learn, right? But there's a certain point where that learning becomes ineffective, right? It's like the bell curve, right? So, like, up here, like, you've learned enough that you can actually be a successful activist. You don't need to be an absolute expert in the field. And what happens is when people pass that point and they get stuck in that habit of learning, their effectiveness starts to drop, because again, they get stuck in that. They get stuck in that loop. They get stuck in those habits of, I want to learn more about the issue and just know about it. I want to talk about it with people. And especially, it's usually people who are already interested in the issue, or if they're not interested in the issue, your level of knowledge is way too far past what a beginner is ready for. And you become ineffective in yourself because you've created this habit of, I just want to keep learning and this is what I feel like is productive. Or you become ineffective because you can't actually communicate with people who are new to the topic and new to actually learning about this. So we need to be really careful as activists that when we reach that top of the scale or reach that top of the curve, that we need to realize that and we need to break that habit of learning and start acting and use that effectiveness and stay right there. It doesn't mean that you can't keep learning more stuff over here, but you have to keep acting and start learning what it means to actually make a difference and to actually engage in change rather than just continually learning. So that kind of falls into the LARPing category, but it also, I think, is a little bit of a separate topic. Whereas, the live action role play activists are, maybe forming organizations and sitting in meetings and acting like they're making plans and setting up bylaws and stuff like this. And that you do need to do that for an organization, but that's not activism of itself. It's like creating a foundation that unfortunately is somewhat required in this society to actually start doing things. So, and then the learning thing is just like you don't even, maybe even start that organization, you just learn about things, and eventually, again, that just is ineffective. So, um, yeah, so I guess that's pretty much the overview of what I wanted to talk about today. I've just been disappointed to see so much LARPing and activism and so much learning and activism and no actual activism. You have to get past that point of learning and knowing what you need to do, and then organize, and then get past that point of organization and start mobilizing. But when you mobilize, you also have to mobilize in an effective way. So I guess let's talk a little bit about what it means to mobilize in an effective way. So I've kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, which is you need to start talking to your local leaders. You need to actually engage in your local communities first. Um, we don't have hope to change things on the national scale right now. It's going to come from the bottom up first. So we have to put pressure from the bottom to the top. So things that can help like that are like letter writing campaigns. Like something like that actually is still effective. If you can get, 200 people in your community to write a letter and then reach out to your mayor or city councilor or even your local representative or your local state senator, um, and set up a meeting with them. Most of them you actually can get meetings or phone calls with, or at very least you can show up at committee meetings. And it's really easy just to go into a committee meeting and give public comment on something. And if you can show them that you have like a stack of letters, like these are people in your community, these are your constituents, the people that elect you, that care about this issue enough to say, to write a letter and to show up here today and to let you know that this is something that they care about, they're going to feel that pressure and they're going to say, well, I probably should do something about this because these are the people that I'm beholden to. These are the people that elected me. So, and I've seen this happen. I've talked to these legislators. I've had these conversations where when they see that there are people who care in their community, they actually do care about it. Or I've heard from legislators who have told me, I haven't heard from anybody in my community that cares about this. So, show me that there are people in my community and I will actually do something about it. And that actually matters on the local scale and on the statewide scale. It does not matter on the national scale right now. And so we need to shift our view from the national down to the local. So if there's one thing to remember about activism, it's mobilize in effective ways on the local scale. That's what activism is all about. It's not about learning. It's not about LARPing. It's not about doing actions that simply get attention, and especially not focusing on the national scale. So um, I do think that there are some actions that get attention on the local scale that can be beneficial, but if you do that without actually starting the conversation, it doesn't work. And they'll see you as a bunch of kids who are shouting and are upset about something but aren't willing to actually engage in the meaningful change that needs to happen. So if a legislator feels like you hate them or you're trying to talk crap on them, that's not going to help anything. They're going to be more turned off to actually helping you and doing what you care about. So you got to engage in peaceful and civil conversation. You have to learn how to express yourself well and to communicate in effective ways with the people who are in charge to make them realize what you care about so that they'll actually change something. And again, build that movement from the bottom up. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for checking out my second episode of this podcast, Thinking It Through with Nate. I have, as always, my links down in the description. You can check out my Patreon if you can even just afford a small donation of $5 a month. That helps me greatly. Right now, I'm going to run a special where I'm going to have a friend of mine who's an artist design a sticker for me, and everyone who signs up in the next 60 days will get a free sticker. Um, so yeah, go ahead and sign up. If you have any, suggestions or anything like that about, what I'm talking about or how I'm talking about it or how I'm doing this podcast, the quality of my video, I know that needs some work, of course, but anything, feedback, I always appreciate that below. I want to get better, and this is something that I actually do want to do part-time, that I've wanted to do for a long time. So I'm going to really try on this. Of course, I'll get a couple episodes up a week, like I've said. This is episode number 2, so more to come soon. Again, thanks for watching and have a great one.